The scent of betrayal isn't always cheap perfume on a collar. Sometimes it smells like fresh paint in the guest room you've been banished to. When crypto billionaire Marcus Davidson moved his 24-year-old mistress into the master bedroom, his 7 months pregnant wife Sarah seemed to accept defeat. She packed her bags, moved to the guest room, and appeared to surrender completely. Marcus thought he'd broken a fragile doll. He had no idea he was unleashing a queen with a blockchain wallet and federal connections. What happened next became the largest cryptocurrency fraud case in American history, and it all started with one pregnant woman who refused to stay silent. This is the story of how Sarah Davidson turned her husband's ultimate betrayal into his total destruction. But before we dive in, if you love stories of justice served ice cold, smash that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life dramas that'll leave you speechless. Trust me, you won't want to miss what Sarah did next. The scent of betrayal isn't always cheap perfume on a collar. Sometimes it smells like fresh paint in the guest room you've been banished to. For Sarah Davidson, 7 months pregnant and the architect of her husband's social standing, the betrayal was an invoice left on the kitchen island, an invoice for king-sized furniture from West Elm, delivered not to the guest room, but to her master bedroom. Her husband, the crypto billionaire Marcus Davidson, wasn't just having an affair. He was moving his mistress into their life, into their bed, while his unborn child grew in the womb of the woman he was displacing. But Marcus underestimated Sarah. He thought he was breaking a fragile doll. He had no idea he was unleashing a queen. The Austin penthouse on the 40th floor overlooking Lady Bird Lake wasn't a home. It was a statement, a declaration of war won on the battlefield of cryptocurrency, curated to perfection by Sarah. Each piece of art, from the Basquiat in the foyer to the Calder mobile that danced in the breeze from the terrace, had been sourced by her. She had transformed Marcus Davidson, a brilliant but brutish programmer from Ohio, into a Texas tech titan. She taught him which fork to use, which artists to name drop, and which charities to shower with just enough Bitcoin to be noticed, but not audited. Their life, viewed from the outside, was a masterpiece of calculated perfection. Marcus, with his sharp suits and sharper smile, was the engine. Sarah, with her effortless grace and a network that was the envy of every socialite in Austin, was the polished, gleaming chassis. And now the final piece was being added: an heir. A son. The scans had confirmed due in 8 weeks, but for the last 6 months, a crack had appeared in the porcelain facade of their marriage. It started subtly. Marcus, who had once craved her input on every deal, now grunted monosyllabic answers from behind his laptop screen. His phone, once left carelessly on the nightstand, was now perpetually face down or in his pocket. He started staying late at the office, his excuses flimsy and coated in a transparent layer of condescension. "You wouldn't understand, babe. It's complex crypto stuff." Sarah understood complexity. She understood the nuanced brushstrokes of a Rothko and the intricate politics of a museum board. She certainly understood when her husband was lying. The final, irrefutable proof came not as a lipstick stain, but as an alien scent. It was Bath & Body Works vanilla, a fragrance so ubiquitous among the city's ambitious 20-somethings that it was practically a uniform. It clung to his Tesla's interior, faint but persistent. It was not her scent. She wore Tom Ford Black Orchid, a classic, sophisticated fragrance Marcus once claimed he adored. She decided to wait. A direct confrontation would only lead to denials and gaslighting. Marcus was a master of that. He could convince a jury the sky was green if there was money in it. So Sarah watched, gathered her strength, and endured the silent, lonely dinners in their cavernous dining room, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday. It was gray and raining, the kind of day that made the city feel like a cage. Sarah was arranging a delivery of hydrangeas when Marcus came home early, a rare occurrence these days. He didn't have his usual briefcase. Behind him stood a young woman, probably 24, with sharp features, a blunt blonde bob, and a look of defiant ownership in her eyes. She was clutching a designer suitcase, rolling it like she owned the place, and she smelled faintly of vanilla. "Sarah," Marcus said, his voice stripped of all warmth. It was the voice he used for hostile takeovers. "This is Taylor Brooks. She'll be staying with us for a while." The world tilted. The hydrangeas in Sarah's hands suddenly felt impossibly heavy. She looked from Marcus's cold, resolute face to the girl, Taylor, who was brazenly scanning the apartment, her eyes cataloging the value of every object like a seasoned appraiser. "Staying with us." Sarah's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the tension in the room like a blade. "In the guest room, I presume." Marcus let out a short, humorless laugh. He walked over to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his back to her. "Taylor works with me. There's a big project, a new cryptocurrency launch. It's easier if she's here." Taylor smirked, her phone already out, probably live streaming to her followers. "The hours are just crazy," she added, her voice a saccharine drawl with a slight Texas accent. "Plus, your guest room is so cute I saw it on Marcus's virtual tour." Virtual tour. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. He had been showing off their home to this woman, planning this invasion while Sarah picked out baby clothes and researched pediatricians. Sarah placed the flowers down, her hands shaking slightly. She would not cry. Not in front of this interloper. "The guest room is prepared. I had it cleaned yesterday." Marcus turned, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. His eyes were like chips of ice, the same look he wore when destroying competitors in boardrooms. "Actually, no. The guest room is a bit small, and the bed is only a queen. Taylor is used to more space." A cold dread, heavier and more suffocating than any fear she had ever known, began to seep into Sarah's bones. "What are you saying, Marcus?" He took a sip of his whiskey, his gaze unwavering. "I'm saying she'll be more comfortable in the master. You can take the guest room. I've already had your things moved." It was the casual cruelty that shattered her. Not just the affair, not just bringing her here, but the calculated demotion, the methodical stripping of her status, her place, her home. He had moved her things. He had erased her from their shared space while she was out buying flowers for their table. She was no longer the lady of the house. She was a guest, an inconvenience, a pregnant burden he was shuffling aside to make room for his new life. Taylor's smirk widened into a triumphant smile. She glided past Sarah, her suitcase wheels clicking softly on the marble floor, and headed down the hallway toward the master bedroom. Their bedroom. The room where their son had been conceived. Sarah stood frozen, the sound of blood roaring in her ears. Marcus watched her, a flicker of something crossing his face, guilt annoyance before it was replaced by stony resolve. "It's for the best, babe," he said, as if discussing a minor stock fluctuation. "Let's not make this dramatic." But it was already dramatic. It was a declaration of war. And as Sarah stood there, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly, she felt a new kind of strength hardening within her. It was cold and clear and sharp as a shard of glass. He thought he had won. He thought he had broken her. Marcus Davidson, for all his market predictions and cryptocurrency genius, had just made the worst calculation of his life. He had forgotten who he was dealing with. He hadn't married a trophy wife. He had married a strategist. That night, Sarah didn't sleep. She lay in the strange bed, the mattress too firm, the pillows lacking the familiar indentation of her own head. The scent of the room was generic, clean, the smell of a hotel. Sometime after midnight, she heard the master bedroom door close and the distinct sound of the lock clicking into place. The finality of it was a physical blow, but it was also the moment Sarah Davidson decided to stop being a victim and start being a predator. The next morning, the new reality set in with brutal clarity. Sarah emerged from the guest room to find Taylor in the kitchen, wearing one of Marcus's vintage Bitcoin conference t-shirts, making coffee as if she had lived there for years. She didn't acknowledge Sarah, just hummed to herself as the espresso machine hissed, occasionally pausing to film herself for what Sarah assumed was her social media. Marcus was already dressed for work, reading the Wall Street Journal on his tablet at the kitchen island. He looked up as Sarah entered, his expression neutral, businesslike. "Morning," he said, his tone clipped. "There's coffee." "I see that," Sarah replied, her voice dangerously calm. She walked to the refrigerator and took out a carton of orange juice, pouring herself a glass. Her hands were steady. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. "Taylor and I are going to be working from home for the next few days," Marcus announced, not looking at her. "We need to finalize the white paper for the new token launch. We'll need the office." The office? Marcus's sanctuary. A glass-walled room off the main living area that housed his trading setup, his crypto mining rigs, and files containing the architecture of his digital empire. It was his throne room, and now he was claiming it as theirs. "I see," Sarah said, taking a slow sip of juice. The day was a parade of calculated humiliations. Taylor would walk through the living room, talking loudly on her phone, discussing the very cryptocurrency project that was the pretext for her presence. She would ask Marcus's opinion on marketing copy, draping herself over his shoulder as he worked. They ordered lunch and sushi, Sarah's favorite, but they didn't ask if she wanted any. She was a ghost in her own home, a pregnant, powerless specter forced to witness the coronation of her replacement. But Sarah was watching, learning, gathering intelligence like the strategic mind she had always been. That afternoon, while Marcus was on a call and Taylor was in the shower, Sarah made her move. She slipped into the office, her bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. Marcus's computer was open, multiple screens displaying cryptocurrency exchanges, blockchain analytics, and what looked like financial spreadsheets. But it was his phone, carelessly left on the desk, that proved most interesting. It was unlocked, displaying a text thread with Taylor that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Can't believe how easy she's making this," Taylor had written just 20 minutes earlier. "I thought she'd put up a fight, scream or something. She just sort of deflated." Marcus's reply was the true kill shot. "She knows her place. Sarah is practical. She understands the new arrangement. She's not a fighter. Never has been. Not a fighter." The words echoed in the silent, opulent apartment. He had completely and utterly misjudged her. He saw the grace, the quiet composure, the social diplomacy, and mistook it for weakness. He had forgotten that the most effective strategists don't scream and flail. They observe, they plan, and they wait for the perfect moment to strike. But as Sarah continued scrolling through Marcus's phone, she discovered something that made her breath catch. Hidden in a folder marked business expenses were screenshots of cryptocurrency transactions, massive transfers, millions of dollars moving through wallets she didn't recognize. Her finger trembled as she scrolled through the images. These weren't their joint investments. These were secret accounts, hidden fortunes that Marcus had been building while she trusted him with their financial future. The sound of the shower stopping sent Sarah scrambling back to the living room, but not before she had taken photos of Marcus's screen with her own phone. Evidence. Ammunition for a war she was only beginning to understand she was fighting. lying on the plush velvet sofa that evening, her son kicking gently inside her, Sarah Davidson finally allowed herself a small, cold smile. Not a fighter. Fine. Let him believe that. Let them both get comfortable in their stolen kingdom. She reached for her phone, her fingers moving with newfound purpose. She didn't call her mother for a tearful confession or scroll through social media for distraction. She opened her contacts and found a name she hadn't needed in years, a name saved under a simple, discreet heading, Riley. Riley Carter answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and alert despite the late hour. Sarah Jesus, it's been months. Are you okay? Riley had been Sarah's roommate at UT Austin, back when Sarah was getting her MBA and Riley was earning her journalism degree. They had been inseparable then, two ambitious women navigating the male-dominated worlds of business and media. Life had pulled them in different directions after graduation, but the bond remained. Riley, Sarah said, her voice steady and clear as a bell. I'm sorry to call so late, but I find myself in need of your particular skills. There was a brief pause. Riley Carter wasn't just any journalist. She was an investigative reporter for the Austin American-Statesman, known for her deep dives into white-collar crime and her ability to follow money trails through the most complex financial structures. She was exactly what Sarah needed. Sarah, what's going on? You sound different. Sarah looked across the living room toward the glass office where Marcus and Taylor were working late, their laughter drifting through the expensive air. I think my husband is stealing from me, Riley, and I need to know exactly how much and where he's hiding it. Jesus, Riley breathed. Okay, can you meet me tomorrow, somewhere private? I can't leave easily. He's watching me, but I have information, screenshots, transaction records. Can you come here? To your place with him there? Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. He's about to learn that bringing his mistress into my home was the least of his mistakes. He's opened the door to scrutiny, Riley, and I intend to walk right through it. The next morning, Sarah waited until Marcus and Taylor were deep in their work before making her call. She told Marcus she had invited a friend over for lunch, someone to help with her pregnancy isolation. He barely looked up from his screens, waving a dismissive hand. Riley arrived at noon, professional and sharp in a way that immediately commanded respect. She carried a leather messenger bag and moved with the confident stride of someone used to walking into hostile territory. Sarah introduced her to Marcus as my old college friend, the one who writes lifestyle pieces for the paper. Marcus smiled his practiced charm the investor smile and shook Riley's hand. Any friend of Sarah's, he said automatically, already turning back to his work. Taylor didn't even look up from her phone. Sarah led Riley to the terrace, where the noise of the city below would mask their conversation. For the next hour, Sarah laid out everything she had discovered, the secret cryptocurrency transactions, the suspicious timing of Taylor's arrival, the systematic degradation of her position in the household. Riley listened with the intensity of a predator studying prey, occasionally asking sharp questions that revealed the depth of her understanding of financial crime. Sarah, Riley said finally, what you're describing isn't just marital infidelity. If he's moving marital assets into hidden accounts, that's fraud. If he's using his company's resources to fund personal investments without disclosure, that's embezzlement. And if he's doing this while planning to divorce you, he's trying to hide everything before he files papers. Sarah finished. Leave me with nothing while he starts fresh with her. Exactly. But here's the thing, cryptocurrency makes this both easier and harder to prove. Easier because every transaction is recorded on the blockchain. Harder because tracing ownership through shell companies and foreign exchanges requires serious expertise. Riley leaned forward, her eyes bright with the thrill of the hunt. I know someone who can help. A forensic accountant who specializes in crypto crimes, former FBI. If Marcus is hiding money, we'll find it. As Riley packed up her notes, she paused at the terrace door. Sarah, I have to ask. Are you sure you want to go down this road? Investigating financial crimes can get ugly fast. If we find what I think we're going to find, this becomes about more than just divorce proceedings. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling her son's strong kick against her palm. Riley, 6 months ago, I gave up my career to support his dreams. I've spent 2 years building his reputation, his network, his entire social foundation. I'm 7 months pregnant with his child, and he's replaced me with a 24-year-old influencer who films TikToks in my bed. Her voice hardened to steel. He made this ugly when he decided I was disposable. I'm just going to make sure he understands exactly how expensive that miscalculation was. That night, Sarah lay in her exile, listening to the sounds of Marcus and Taylor's celebration drifting through the penthouse. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she wasn't planning her surrender. She was planning her war. 3 days later, Riley returned with her secret weapon, a quiet man in his 50s named Detective Jim Morrison, recently retired from the FBI's cybercrime division. He now worked as a private forensic accountant, and his specialty was following digital money through the labyrinthine world of cryptocurrency. Mrs. Davidson, he said, settling into the cafe chair across from Sarah and Riley. Your friend has shown me the preliminary evidence. What we're looking at here is potentially massive financial fraud. They were meeting at a small coffee shop in East Austin, far from the gleaming towers where Marcus conducted his business. Sarah had told him she was having lunch with her pregnancy yoga instructor. Jim opened his laptop, speaking in the calm, methodical tone of someone who had seen every conceivable form of white-collar crime. Based on the transaction screenshots you provided, your husband has moved approximately $15 million through a series of shell companies and foreign cryptocurrency exchanges over the past 18 months. Sarah felt the air leave her lungs. $15 million. Money that should have been theirs, their son's future, moved and hidden while she planned nursery colors and interviewed nannies. The pattern is sophisticated, but not perfect, Jim continued. He's been converting marital assets' joint investment accounts, business profits into various cryptocurrencies, then moving them through what we call mixers to obscure the trail. Finally, they end up in wallets controlled by companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Riley leaned forward. Can we prove it's him? That's where it gets interesting. The shell companies all have one thing in common. They're registered to a Delaware LLC called TB Holdings. Jim's smile was grim. Taylor Brooks. He named his money laundering operation after his mistress. The arrogance, Sarah breathed. It's always the arrogance that gets them. Exactly. But here's where your situation becomes dangerous. Mrs. Davidson. This isn't just marital asset hiding. Some of these funds appear to have come from his company's client accounts. If I'm right, Marcus isn't just defrauding you, he's been embezzling from investors. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. That's federal crime territory. Multiple federal crimes, wire fraud, securities fraud, possibly RICO violations if this goes deep enough. We're talking about prison time, not just divorce court. Sarah stared out the coffee shop window at the Austin skyline, where Marcus was probably at that very moment conducting business calls and making investment decisions, completely unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. What do I do with this information? She asked. Jim and Riley exchanged a look. That depends, Riley said carefully, on what you want your endgame to be. Do you want him in prison, or do you want your money back? Can I have both? Potentially, but it requires perfect timing and flawless execution. One mistake, and he could disappear to a non-extradition country with whatever money we haven't frozen. Sarah thought of Taylor, lounging in her bed, posting Instagram stories from her kitchen, living off stolen money while Sarah faced an uncertain future as a single mother. She thought of Marcus's dismissive comment, "She's not a fighter." "Tell me what I need to do." Jim pulled out a secure phone, the kind used by law enforcement. "First, we need more evidence: real-time transaction data, communication records, evidence of the investor fraud. That means getting access to his computers and phones. I can't just walk into his office anymore. He's made it clear that's their space now." "You don't have to," Riley said. "But you need to get him out of the apartment for several hours, long enough for Jim to do his work. And you need to do it without raising suspicion," Jim added. "If he realizes we're onto him, he'll start moving money faster than we can trace it." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her mind working through possibilities. Then she smiled, and both Riley and Jim felt a chill at the calculating coldness in her expression. "I know exactly how to get him out of the house," she said. "And I'm going to make sure he's gone for a very long time." That evening, Sarah returned to the penthouse with a new purpose. She found Marcus and Taylor in the living room, sharing a bottle of wine and celebrating what they clearly believed was their victory. Taylor was live streaming again, showing off the apartment to her followers as if it belonged to her. "Marcus," Sarah said, her voice carefully modulated to sound defeated and exhausted, "we need to talk." He looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "Can it wait? We're in the middle of something." "It's about the baby," Sarah said, placing her hand on her belly. "And about what happens next. I think maybe you're right. Maybe it's time for me to accept the new arrangement." Marcus's expression shifted to surprise, then something that looked like relief. "Sarah, I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. I want to discuss terms," she said quietly. "But not here. Not in front of—" She gestured vaguely at Taylor. "Can we meet somewhere tomorrow? Just us like adults." Marcus nodded eagerly, clearly pleased that his strategy of psychological warfare was working. "Of course. How about lunch at the Four Seasons 1:00? "Perfect," Sarah said. "And Marcus, take your time. We have a lot to discuss." As she walked back to her exile in the guest room, Sarah allowed herself one small smile. Marcus thought he was about to claim total victory in their war. He had no idea he was walking into the most devastating ambush of his life. The next morning, Sarah played her role to perfection. She emerged from the guest room looking appropriately defeated, moving slowly, her shoulders slumped in apparent resignation. Marcus watched her with satisfied eyes as she made tea and toast, the picture of a broken woman accepting her fate. "I've been thinking all night," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "About what you said, about accepting the new arrangement. Maybe you're right. Maybe this is what's best for everyone." Taylor looked up from her phone, where she was editing what appeared to be a TikTok video titled, "Moving In with My Rich Boyfriend." Her expression was smugly triumphant. "I knew you'd come around, babe," Marcus said, using the patronizing tone she had grown to hate. "You're a smart woman. You understand how the world works." "I do," Sarah agreed. "Which is why I want to discuss this properly, away from distractions. We need to talk about the baby, about support, about how to divide things fairly." Marcus's eyes lit up. He was clearly imagining Sarah agreeing to some insulting settlement, taking whatever crumbs he offered and disappearing quietly from his life. "The Four Seasons," he said. 1:00. We'll have a civilized conversation about your future." Sarah nodded meekly. I'll make a list. Things we need to discuss. It might take a while. Take all the time you need, Marcus said magnanimously. I want you to feel heard in this process. After Marcus left for his supposed lunch meeting, Sarah waited exactly 15 minutes before texting Riley. He's gone. The apartment is clear except for Taylor, and she's streaming live from the bedroom. Send Jim. Jim Morrison arrived 30 minutes later, carrying what looked like a laptop repair kit. Sarah let him in through the service entrance, and he moved through the apartment with the quiet efficiency of someone who had conducted hundreds of similar operations. Where's the girlfriend? He asked. Bedroom, live streaming. She's got at least 1,000 people watching, so she won't move for the next hour. Jim nodded and got to work. He moved to Marcus's office and began connecting devices to the computers, downloading files, and copying data with mechanical precision. Sarah watched from the doorway, her heart pounding as she realized there was no going back from this moment. How long? She whispered. 20 minutes for the computers. But I also need his phone data, his personal files, anything that might be in a safe or locked drawer. Sarah thought for a moment, then moved to the master bedroom. She could hear Taylor's voice through the door, talking animatedly to her camera about skincare routines and morning smoothies. The girl was completely absorbed in her performance. Moving quietly, Sarah accessed Marcus's walk-in closet. Behind his collection of expensive suits was a small digital safe, the kind wealthy people use for jewelry and important documents. Sarah had watched him open it hundreds of times, never thinking she might one day need the combination herself. Her birthday. The narcissist had used her own birthday as the combination to his secret safe. Inside, she found what she was looking for: USB drives, printed documents, and a second phone she had never seen before. She grabbed everything and carried it back to Jim. Jesus, he breathed, looking at the documents. These are investor communications. He's been lying to his clients about where their money is going. How bad is it? Bad enough that the SEC would classify this as a Ponzi scheme. He's been using new investor money to pay returns to old investors, while siphoning off millions for himself. Jim's fingers flew over his keyboard as he copied the contents of the USB drives. Sarah, your husband isn't just a cheater. He's running a major financial fraud operation. The sound of Taylor's voice growing closer made them both freeze. She was moving through the apartment, probably filming a house tour for her followers. Sarah quickly gathered the documents and moved Jim toward the service entrance. How long before you know everything? She asked. Give me 48 hours. But Sarah, when this breaks, it's going to be massive. National news, federal investigators, the works. Your life is about to become very public, very quickly. Sarah thought of her unborn son, of the life she had carefully built, of the future she had imagined. All of it was about to disappear into the chaos of criminal investigation and media scrutiny. Will he go to prison? If I'm right about what I'm seeing here, 20 to life. This is tens of millions in fraud, multiple federal crimes, hundreds of victims. As Jim disappeared into the service elevator, Sarah returned to the living room and settled onto the sofa with a book, the picture of a pregnant woman spending a quiet afternoon at home. When Taylor emerged from the bedroom an hour later, she found Sarah exactly where she expected: isolated, powerless, and irrelevant. But Sarah Davidson was none of those things. She was a woman who had just set in motion the complete destruction of the man who had betrayed her. And the most beautiful part was that Marcus would walk back into this apartment in a few hours, believing he had won everything, completely unaware that his empire was already burning to the ground. Marcus returned from his lunch meeting 3 hours later, practically glowing with satisfaction. He found Sarah in the guest room, apparently napping, and didn't bother to wake her. From her bed, she could hear him talking excitedly to Taylor about Sarah's surrender and their plans for after the baby was born. "She's finally accepting reality," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly through the expensive but thin walls. "She'll take the settlement, move somewhere quiet, and we can get on with our lives." "What kind of settlement?" Taylor asked, and Sarah could hear the calculating interest in her voice. "Small." Marcus laughed. "The prenup limits her to basic support, maybe a couple $100,000, enough to keep her comfortable, but not enough to threaten us." Sarah lay in the darkness, listening to them plan her future as if she were already gone. But her phone was buzzing with updates from Jim and Riley, and the news was more devastating than she had dared hope. Riley's text came first. "Jim found it all. 15 million is just the beginning. This is a $40 million fraud operation spanning 3 years. He's been stealing from pension funds, Sarah, teachers, firefighters, cops. This is going to destroy him completely." Jim's message was more detailed. "Documentation is solid. SEC violations, wire fraud, investor fraud, money laundering through crypto. Also found evidence of tax evasion and possible connections to organized crime through some of his international investors. This isn't just big, Sarah. This is federal prosecutor career-making big." But it was Riley's final text that made Sarah's blood run cold. "There's something else. Medical records in his files. He's been researching pregnancy complications, specifically preterm labor caused by environmental stressors. Sarah, I think he's been planning something." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her belly. Environmental stressors. The stress of discovering his affair, of being displaced from her own bedroom, of facing financial ruin while 7 months pregnant. Had all of this been calculated to trigger exactly the kind of medical emergency that would leave her vulnerable, potentially losing the baby that represented her strongest legal claim to his assets? The thought that Marcus might have been orchestrating her psychological torture not just to break her spirit, but to endanger their child, ignited a rage in Sarah that burned hotter than anything she had ever felt. She texted back quickly. "How long before we can move on him?" Riley's response was immediate. "Jim says 24 hours for FBI coordination." "But Sarah, once this starts, there's no stopping it. Federal investigation, media circus, everything. Are you ready?" Sarah looked around the guest room where she had been exiled, at the closed door that separated her from the life being planned without her, at the future that Marcus thought he could simply erase and rewrite. She typed back, "I've been ready since the moment he brought her into my home." But as Sarah prepared for sleep that night, her phone buzzed with one more message, this one from an unknown number. "Mrs. Davidson, this is Agent Elena Vasquez with the FBI's White Collar Crime Division. We need to meet. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., Federal Building downtown. Come alone, and tell no one where you're going." Sarah stared at the message, her heart pounding. The federal government was moving faster than she had expected. In less than 24 hours, Marcus's world was going to explode, and she needed to be ready for the fallout. That night, as she lay listening to the sounds of Marcus and Taylor celebrating their presumed victory, Sarah allowed herself to imagine the moment when federal agents would walk through that front door. She pictured Marcus's face when he realized that his brilliant plan had been not just discovered, but documented, analyzed, and weaponized against him. He thought he was playing chess, moving pieces around a board where Sarah was just another disposable pawn. But Sarah Davidson had never been playing chess. She had been playing cryptocurrency, and in that game, every transaction was permanent. Every mistake was recorded forever, and every betrayal came with compound interest. Tomorrow, Marcus would learn that the most dangerous person in any room isn't the one making the most noise. It's the one who's been quietly taking notes. Sarah woke before dawn, her mind sharp and focused despite her exhaustion. She dressed carefully in a navy business suit that accommodated her pregnancy while projecting competence and credibility. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about hundreds of investors who had trusted Marcus with their life savings. She told Marcus she had a doctor's appointment and would be gone most of the morning. He barely looked up from his computer, too absorbed in managing his criminal enterprise to pay attention to his pregnant wife's medical needs. The FBI field office in downtown Austin was a fortress of glass and steel that projected federal authority. Agent Elena Vasquez met Sarah in the lobby, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone who had built her career dismantling financial criminals. "Mrs. Davidson, thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult." They were joined by Agent Michael Torres, a specialist in cryptocurrency crimes, and Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, whose presence meant the government was already building a prosecution case. "Let me be direct," Agent Vasquez began once they were seated in a secure conference room. "Your husband is running one of the largest cryptocurrency fraud schemes we've seen. The evidence you've provided through your associates has given us probable cause for federal warrants." Sarah felt a surge of vindication. "How extensive is it? $43 million stolen from over 200 investors," Attorney Walsh said. "Pension funds, retirement accounts, college savings, people who trusted him with their futures while he was funding his lifestyle and hiding assets from you." Agent Torres pulled up a digital presentation on the wall screen. "The scheme is sophisticated. He would take investor money, claim to be making cryptocurrency investments on their behalf, then use new investor money to pay fake returns to earlier investors. Classic Ponzi structure." "Meanwhile," Agent Vasquez continued, "he was skimming millions into personal accounts, then laundering it through the cryptocurrency mixers and offshore companies your investigator identified." Sarah studied the charts and timelines displayed on the screen. The scope was staggering. "When did it start?" "Approximately 6 months after your marriage," Attorney Walsh said. "Which suggests the fraud may have been planned from the beginning. Your social connections, your reputation in Austin society, it gave him credibility with high net worth investors." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her entire marriage had been a business strategy. Marcus hadn't just fallen out of love with her, he had never loved her at all. She had been a credential, a trophy wife whose social standing could be monetized. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her voice steady despite the emotional earthquake she was experiencing. "We execute search warrants tomorrow morning," Agent Vasquez explained. "Simultaneous raids on your apartment, his offices, and known associate locations. We'll freeze all accounts, seize computers and documents, and arrest anyone involved in the conspiracy, including Marcus. Marcus will be arrested on federal charges including wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. Given the amount involved and the number of victims, he's looking at 20 to 30 years in federal prison." Sarah thought of Taylor, sleeping in her bed, completely unaware that her sugar daddy was about to become a federal defendant. "What about the woman he's been living with?" Agent Torres consulted his notes. "Taylor Brooks. We're investigating her role. If she knowingly participated in the fraud or helped launder money, she could face conspiracy charges, but right now, it appears she was more of a useful idiot than a co-conspirator." "Mrs. Davidson," Attorney Walsh leaned forward, "I need to ask about your own involvement. Did you have any knowledge of your husband's illegal activities?" "None," Sarah said firmly. "I discovered the hidden transactions 3 days ago. Before that, I trusted him completely with our financial affairs." "Good, because we need your cooperation as a witness. Your testimony about his behavior, the timeline of events, The systematic isolation and psychological abuse, it all helps establish his criminal mindset and intent to defraud. Agent Vasquez handed Sarah a thick folder. These are victim impact statements from people whose lives Marcus destroyed, teachers who lost their pension funds, families who lost their children's college money, retirees who lost everything. Sarah opened the folder and read the first few pages. Stories of betrayal and financial devastation. Elderly couples facing poverty because they had trusted the charming cryptocurrency expert who came so highly recommended by Austin's social elite. I want to help, Sarah said. I want to make sure he can never do this to anyone else. There's something else, Agent Vasquez said carefully. The timing of his decision to move his mistress into your home, to psychologically torture you while you're pregnant, we believe it was designed to trigger a medical emergency. Sarah's blood ran cold. What do you mean? If you had lost the baby due to stress-induced complications, it would have eliminated your strongest legal claim to marital assets. It also would have provided him with sympathy from investors and social contacts, the grieving husband whose wife suffered a tragic loss. The calculated cruelty of it took Sarah's breath away. Marcus hadn't just betrayed her. He had been willing to endanger their child to protect his criminal enterprise. But here's what he didn't count on, Attorney Walsh said with a grim smile. Crypto transactions are forever. Every stolen dollar is documented on the blockchain. Every lie he told investors is in writing. Every offshore account can be traced. As Sarah left the federal building 3 hours later, she felt the weight of what was about to happen. Tomorrow, Marcus's world would collapse, and the shock waves would reach every corner of Austin's financial and social elite. But tonight, she would return to that penthouse and watch him celebrate his presumed victory one last time. Tomorrow, he would learn that the quiet, pregnant woman he had discarded was the one who had built his cage, turned the key, and thrown it away forever. Sarah returned to the penthouse to find Marcus and Taylor celebrating. Empty champagne bottles sat on the kitchen counter, and Taylor was filming herself dancing around the living room for what appeared to be an Instagram story about living my best life. "How was the doctor?" Marcus asked, his tone perfunctory. "Fine," Sarah replied. "Everything's progressing normally." She settled onto the sofa and opened a book, playing the role of the defeated wife one final time. But her phone was buzzing with final updates from Agent Vasquez. The federal warrants had been signed. Teams were in position. At exactly 6 a.m. tomorrow morning, Marcus Davidson's criminal empire would come crashing down. That evening, Marcus ordered dinner from their favorite restaurant. The irony that it would be his last meal as a free man wasn't lost on Sarah. He was animated, talking excitedly about the cryptocurrency project he and Taylor were supposedly working on. "This new token is going to revolutionize decentralized finance," he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "We're talking about fundamentally changing how people think about digital assets." Sarah nodded politely, thinking about the federal prosecutors who would soon be explaining to a jury exactly how Marcus had changed how people thought about their life savings by stealing them. Taylor was live streaming again, showing off the apartment to her followers and talking about her amazing new life with the most brilliant man in crypto. Her viewer count was climbing toward 5,000, all of them about to witness the most spectacular downfall in recent memory. "You know what I love about you, babe," Marcus said to Taylor, his voice carrying clearly through the apartment. "You actually understand what I'm building here. You see the vision." Unlike his pregnant wife, was the unspoken comparison. Sarah continued reading her book, letting them believe she was irrelevant to their future plans. At 11 p.m., Marcus and Taylor retired to the master bedroom. Sarah could hear them laughing and talking, planning trips they would never take, discussing investments they would never make. She lay in the guest room, one hand on her belly, feeling her son's strong movements. Tomorrow, he would be born into a very different world than the one his father had imagined. At 5:45 a.m., Sarah woke to her phone buzzing. A text from Agent Vasquez. "Teams in position. This is happening." Sarah got up and moved to the window, looking out at the city skyline where Marcus had built his reputation as a cryptocurrency genius. In 15 minutes, that reputation would be replaced by federal charges and media coverage of one of the largest financial frauds in Texas history. At exactly 6 a.m., Sarah heard the elevator. The front door exploded open with the force of a federal battering ram. FBI federal warrant, everyone on the ground now. The apartment filled with armed federal agents in tactical gear, moving with military precision through every room. Sarah heard Marcus shouting from the bedroom, Taylor screaming, the sound of furniture being overturned as agents secured the premises. Sarah remained calm, sitting on the edge of her bed with her hands visible, exactly as Agent Vasquez had instructed. 2 agents entered her room, weapons drawn but not pointed at her. Sarah Davidson. Yes. Agent Chen, FBI. Ma'am, we need you to come with us for your safety. This is an active crime scene. As Sarah was escorted through the living room, she saw Marcus in handcuffs, his face a mask of shock and disbelief. Taylor was wrapped in a sheet, sobbing hysterically as agents explained that she was not under arrest but would need to be interviewed. "Sarah," Marcus called out as agents led him toward the elevator. "Sarah, what's happening? I don't understand." Sarah paused, looking at the man who had planned to destroy her life to protect his criminal enterprise. "You said I wasn't a fighter, Marcus. You were wrong." The look of dawning comprehension on his face was the most satisfying moment of Sarah Davidson's life. As federal agents led Marcus away, Agent Vasquez appeared at Sarah's side. "Are you okay, Mrs. Davidson?" Sarah watched through the floor-to-ceiling windows as news vans began arriving on the street below, drawn by police scanners and federal activity. By evening, this would be the lead story on every business news program in the country. "I'm perfect," Sarah said, her hand resting on her belly. "We both are." 6 months later, Sarah Davidson stood in the penthouse that was now legally hers, watching the Austin skyline glitter in the afternoon sun. The space had been transformed gone, were Marcus's trading screens and cryptocurrency mining rigs, replaced by a nursery where her son, David, slept peacefully in his crib. The federal prosecution of Marcus Davidson had become a landmark case in cryptocurrency fraud. He had pled guilty to 47 federal charges and received a sentence of 28 years in federal prison. The government had recovered $38 million of the stolen funds, most of which had been returned to victims. Taylor Brooks had cooperated with federal investigators and avoided criminal charges. Though her brief moment as a cryptocurrency kingpin's girlfriend had made her a cautionary tale that went viral across social media, she had returned to whatever life existed before she decided to target other women's husbands. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Riley Carter, who had won a Pulitzer Prize for her investigative series on cryptocurrency fraud. "Lunch tomorrow, I have news about the foundation." The Sarah Davidson Foundation for Financial Crime Victims had become one of the fastest-growing nonprofits in Texas, helping people rebuild their lives after white-collar crimes. Sarah used her experience, her social connections, and yes, her story, to raise money and awareness for the hundreds of thousands of Americans who lost everything to financial predators. But the real victory wasn't the foundation, or the recovered money, or even Marcus's imprisonment. The real victory was David, healthy and strong, sleeping in the nursery that Sarah had designed in the master bedroom that was now permanently hers. As she stood watching her son sleep, Sarah reflected on the woman she had been 6 months ago, trusting, vulnerable, dependent on a man who saw her as disposable. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder but stronger, scarred but victorious. Her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize. These days, she received calls from documentary filmmakers, journalists, and other fraud victims who had heard her story. She almost didn't answer. Mrs. Davidson. This is Detective Rivera with the Austin Police Department. We need to talk. Sarah's blood chilled. Is everything okay? It's about your husband, ma'am. He's been making calls from federal prison to people on the outside. We think he might be planning something. Sarah looked down at her sleeping son, thinking about the envelope that had been slipped under her door just last week. An envelope containing photos of her daily routine, her son's daycare, her route to the foundation office. Marcus Davidson was in federal prison, but his network was still out there. And apparently, his desire for revenge was stronger than his fear of additional federal charges. Detective Rivera, Sarah said, her voice calm but her mind already shifting back into survival mode. I think we need to meet. As she hung up the phone, Sarah realized that her story wasn't over. Marcus had underestimated her once, and it had cost him everything. If he was planning to make that same mistake again, he was about to learn that the woman who had destroyed his criminal empire was just getting started. She walked to her home office, the former cryptocurrency command center where Marcus had run his fraudulent schemes, and opened her laptop. If Marcus wanted to play another game, she would be ready. After all, she had already proven that when it came to protecting her son and her future, Sarah Davidson always played to win. The city of Austin glittered below her windows, and somewhere in the distance, her phone was already ringing with reporters who had gotten word of the latest development in the Marcus Davidson case. Tomorrow, there would be new headlines, new challenges, new battles to fight. But tonight, Sarah Davidson, cryptocurrency fraud survivor, federal witness, foundation founder, and mother, was exactly where she belonged in her own home, on her own terms, writing her own ending to a story that someone else had tried to write for her. The war was over. She had won. And if anyone wanted to challenge that victory, they would learn exactly why the federal government had called Sarah Davidson their most effective witness in the largest cryptocurrency fraud prosecution in American history. Some stories end with justice. The best ones end with power transferred to the right hands. Sarah Davidson's story was definitely one of the best,